Imagine a world where whenever you simply drive past the hospital, you get an overwhelming feeling of nausea. This nausea can in fact be so overwhelming that you may actually vomit in the car. For many cancer patients, this imaginary world is actually a reality, and the nausea that they experience is a reaction of the chemotherapy treatment. Chemotherapy is so unpleasant of a treatment that even just driving past the hospital where one receives the treatment at can trigger an intense feeling of nausea in the brain and has actually caused people to throw up before. In today's modern world, we have cures for almost everything. We have chemotherapy, which treats cancer. We have medicines for arthritis pains and even simple headaches. Unfortunately, there is one medicine that we have not developed, and that is a medicine which can cure the nausea and anxiety that goes along with cancer and chemotherapy treatment. Sadly, this makes many cancer patients the victim of the own treatments which they are using in their battle against cancer. The reason I'm here to talk to you today is to convince you that marijuana should be considered a little bit more instead of just completely excluded, because it actually is a useful drug that can be used to treat the nausea that goes along with chemotherapy. Many of the reasons that people and doctors and even scientists are discriminated against marijuana is because culturally marijuana is viewed as a dirty drug, addictive, and dangerous. In the 1900s, marijuana was brought to the United States by Mexican immigrants who were perceived by United States citizens as dirty. This stereotype is untrue, but the cultural experience of it still stands and carries into today's society, unfortunately. In the 1900s, they were also prejudiced against marijuana because it was a drug that did cause some reactions in people, and there were also bars and speakeasies where marijuana was legal. People thought that marijuana reminded them of opium, which had been legal in the United States in the 1800s, and they were afraid that there would be another opium epidemic as the one that happened in the 1870s, but they thought they would have marijuana instead. In 1953, Harry Anslinger, who worked for the government, said, "Those accustomed to habitual use of marijuana eventually develop a delirious rage, and they are prone to violent crime." This stereotype eventually faded, but it was replaced by a true theory called the gateway theory, which says that marijuana can lead to use of worse, harmful drugs such as heroin and cocaine. This theory isn't entirely untrue, but not because marijuana causes an urge for people to go and seek out heroin or cocaine, but because marijuana can actually put people into contact with drug dealers who may also sell more harmful drugs such as heroin and cocaine. Chemotherapy and anti-cancer drugs cause nausea by affecting the stomach lining or even just by triggering a response in the brain. So the nausea is actually a psychological phenomenon instead of a physical phenomenon, but it does manifest itself in physical form. The National Cancer Institute feels that other drugs may work in causing nausea, in treating the nausea experienced with chemotherapy, such as drugs that work on serotonin in the brain or other drugs. However, the Institute of Medicine says that oral THC, such as Marinol, which is an approved drug for use, may work better because it has effects that also treat anxiety and the loss of appetite that people on chemotherapy experience. Smoked marijuana is not in use. There's only about 8 people in the country who receive government-issued joints of marijuana, and that's because these people had all smoked marijuana to treat their pain back in the 1920s, whenever marijuana was legal. And the government did say that they needed the marijuana and no other medicine would work, and that's why the government issues these joints to people. There have been studies that found that the effects of smoking THC, or marijuana, are like those of smoking tobacco. So actually smoked joints of marijuana aren't a good idea to use when treating the nausea of chemotherapy, because you actually would be getting side effects that could lead to lung cancer or more harmful effects, and that's something that people who are already battling cancer wouldn't want in their life. There have been 31 human studies of oral THC. Lastly, I want to talk about a study done by oncologists the surveyed oncologists. It was done by Zoblin and Keeman, and they surveyed about 1,035 doctors, which I drew this diagram to represent. Each person is 100 doctors, so that's how many. And when they surveyed the doctors, they asked if they recommended THC to be used for their patients in treating nausea. And out of the 1,035 cancer doctors, 44% of them said yes, and 56% of them said no. So that shows the cultural stereotypes are slowly changing about marijuana, and that in the future, oral forms of THC may start to become more prevalent in choosing the nausea associated with cancer. Thank you.
Okay.